Right now, we start this hour with this question. Can the President of the United States take control of independent federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission? That is what justices on the high court are thinking about today. So the issue is before the court that the president's firing of former Federal Trade Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter needed to come into question. So Slaughter argues that Congress designed the Federal Trade Commission to be bipartisan in investigating corporate mergers and consumer fraud. Those arguments in court already heating up this morning. Listen in.
How about employees?
Again, we haven't challenged the restrictions on.
I know you haven't challenged it. It's really, the question is, where does this lead? What does it take you to, given what your primary rationale is? Employees are wielding executive power all over the place, and yet we've had civil service laws that give them substantial protection from removal for over a century. How about those?
Well, we do not challenge.
I know what you don't challenge. You're missing the point.
Well, then let me point the court to, if I could, to 7511B, of the civil service laws, the CSRA that we cite in our brief. That is a series of exceptions in it that provides no judicial relief at all to classes of employees, they're called. Now, some of those employees are clearly officers, some aren't, but for example, presidentially appointed officers, Senate-confirmed officials, those who exercise substantial policymaking or have confidential responsibilities, and members of the CIA, for employees of the CIA and the Foreign Service. So there's already been the political branches have in many ways already addressed issues with employees.
All right, so just a taste of some of those discussions. Live now to CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, good to be with you today. Okay, so break down what we just heard there and then sort of give us a walkthrough of some of the arguments for and against here.
So what we just heard is one of the better exchanges that demonstrates what the federal government is arguing and what the other side is here. So the federal government, the Trump administration, is arguing that when it comes to executive agencies like the FTC, like the NLRB, all these alphabet agencies that actually have a lot of power in the federal government, that the president should be able to fire the heads of those agencies at will, that he should not be limited and have to give a reason, that Congress basically can't say you can only remove that person for cause. Why? Because the Trump administration is arguing that when it comes to the executive branch, that the chief executive, the president, has the ultimate power to say, I don't want you here anymore, and therefore I am firing you. On the other side, what we're hearing a lot of is a lot of details, but basically boils down to actually Congress can create that protection, the idea that some of these agencies should be independent from the whims of a president. And again, this is any president, and that having for-cause protection for the heads of these agencies is something that is within Congress's power. So, Reed, to wrap up, it is this big separation of powers question. Who gets the power, the executive or Congress? Okay, so everything is connected in government. What's at stake here? If President Trump's team sees a win here, how will that affect things in a larger sense? So it depends on who you're listening to a little bit, but what's at stake really is the president's ability to look at the heads of any of these executive agencies with the caveat of maybe not the Fed, maybe not the Federal Reserve, and say, you're not doing what I want you to do, and therefore here's the door. I'm firing you. And that obviously has big implications for how all of these executive agencies can function, whether or not they think that they can do things that the president doesn't agree with, whether or not they think that would put them in the crosshairs to the extent that the heads of these agencies could be fired. And it's really about how much these agencies have to essentially comply with the will of the president, or whether or not they exercise some independence. And there's a lot of these agencies. Again, the National Labor Relations Board, we're talking about the Fair Trade Commission here. There's a lot of other ones. And then, Reed, the last thing is what you hear a lot of the justices mention just over the last hour is, and where's the limiting principle? How far does the president's power go for other agencies or other courts, like the tax court, for instance? So they're struggling with a lot here this morning.
Okay, well, Jessica Levinson, I'm glad you're listening in on it because you're able to pop in and decipher it all for us. Good to talk to you, friend, on a Monday. Have a great week and a great day ahead. Live now to CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. So break down for our viewers what each side is trying to convince these justices of.
Reed, it's great to join you. So what the Solicitor General, Jan Crawford, has been arguing is that the president should have the right to fire the leaders of these independent agencies, even without specific cause. Now, he's been getting a lot of pushback from the liberal justices. As we were just hearing, they have grave concerns about the way that this would expand presidential power. Justice Sotomayor said that the court should be weary of overturning a 90-year precedent, Reed, that she says established the very structure of our modern federal government. She said to Jan Crawford, "You're asking us to destroy the structure of government," and also questioned what other case has fundamentally altered the way that our government functions. Now, Chief Justice Roberts says that the Federal Trade Commission that was shielded 90 years ago by this case, Humphrey's executor, looked very different than the one we see today, that now it has much more executive power. So we're really hearing opposition on each side and from the justices themselves.
Well, and it also really speaks to the separation of powers in the way the Founding Fathers established these United States, does it not?
Absolutely, and that is also what we've been hearing from the justices, is a deep concern about the way this would impact the separation of power in this country, whether this would give the president such sweeping power. A case that we've heard mentioned quite a few times, in addition to that Humphrey's executor precedent from about 100 years ago, is the Trump versus United States case, Reed, which is the one that the Supreme Court gave President Trump broad immunity in. So this case could really have big implications for the expansiveness of presidential power. It could also impact about 24 different agencies that could be impacted by this decision above the FTC.
All right, Katrina Kaufman breaking it down. Thank you so much. Good to talk to you.
90 years ago, a president with a big domestic agenda said he needed swift implementation of that agenda to save the nation. And he tried to fire a bureaucrat named William Humphrey, a member of the Federal Trade Commission. Humphrey and his trust sued, and the Supreme Court ruled against that president. That president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. President Trump's top lawyer told the Supreme Court today that that decision, way back in FDR's time, was deeply flawed, and that presidents should be able to fire members of independent agencies. The High Court appeared sympathetic, meaning a vast restructuring of federal power may soon follow. For more on this, CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins me now from the Supreme Court. Jan, you were there. How'd it go?
Well, I mean, today's Mr. Humphrey is a FTC commissioner by the name of Rebecca Slaughter. And when President Trump fired her back in March, she sued. She said presidents, because of that old case you cited, can't fire members of these independent federal agencies. The way they're created is that they have 5-year, 7-year terms. They go through administrations, and they're supposed to be bipartisan. Her lawyer made those arguments in court today, and it was a pretty rough row for him to hoe, because this is a Supreme Court that has signaled over the years that is increasingly concerned about the power that these independent federal agencies now exercise. Whatever it may have looked like back in 1914 when Congress created the Federal Trade Commission, or in 1935 when it last weighed specifically on this issue, that is not the modern day federal agency.
And was there a conversation before the High Court, Jan, about the implications of if the Supreme Court were to side with the administration on this case, could that jeopardize the independence of something like the Federal Reserve?
Major, I think this you indicated this is a pretty clear 6-3 split, with the conservatives siding with the Trump administration and saying that presidents do have this power because these agencies have changed, that they're accountable to no one now. So the president can have this power to remove these officials. At least then he has to be accountable to the voters. The liberal justices didn't see it that way at all. They predicted chaos. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said to the lawyer for the Trump administration, for example, that you're asking us to basically destroy the structure structure of our government. But again, those are only 3 of the justices on that 9-member court. And I think the conservatives pretty clearly signaled that this is the direction they're going. And Major, they've been signaling it for years. There have been several cases going back at least in the past decade where they've gradually said that Congress can't put these limits on presidential firings. And in fact, President Biden himself fired a member of the Social Security Administration using some of that same kind of rationale. So this is a case that, while I think it is going to be a victory for Trump, it's important to remember that it's going to apply to all presidents, that Democratic presidents will also have this same authority. When they come into office, they can remove these members of these independent federal agencies if the court rules, as it did suggest that it would be today in the FTC case, which also means it'll apply in some of these other federal agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and on and on. There's about 24 other agencies that'll impact, Major.
Going even farther back in history, Alexander Hamilton argued on behalf of an energetic executive. Well, that was one of the issues before the court. Jan Crawford, as always, thank you so much for summarizing.